The station smelled like burnt metal and old grease. Sergeant Darian Holt had been awake for 31 hours. His boots were worn down at the heel, his coffee was cold, and the only thing he wanted in the world was to find a quiet corner and sleep for 12 hours without someone shooting at him. He was not a tall man, not a handsome man, and by most measures, not a remarkable man. He had a flat nose that had been broken twice, short brown hair with some gray coming in at the sides, and the kind of tired eyes that come from seeing too much for too long. He was 34 years old, and had been a soldier for 14 of those years. He was stationed on Valtari Station 9, a trading hub out near the edge of known space, where dozens of alien species moved goods, made deals, and generally ignored each other. Humans were allowed here, but only barely. The Galactic Conclave had classified Earth as a protected primitive world 40 years ago, which was a polite way of saying humanity was not ready for full contact with the wider galaxy. Earth had been given limited access to a few stations, limited trade rights, and a very short list of rules to follow. Darian knew the rules. He followed them because it was his job. He was not supposed to be a hero. He was not supposed to do anything that night except walk his patrol route, check the cargo bay locks, and stay out of trouble. He heard the explosion at 0217 hours. It was not a big explosion, more of a sharp crack, followed by the low hiss of air moving through a breach somewhere in Section 14. Darian was already moving before he had time to think about it. He was a soldier. Moving toward danger was simply what soldiers did. Section 14 was one of the older parts of the station, a ring of corridors that connected the main docking arms to the central hub. The lights there had never worked properly, and the floor plates rattled when you walked on them. Tonight the lights were worse than usual, flickering on and off in long, slow pulses. Thin, acrid smoke that caught in the throat. He found the first body 20 meters in. A station guard, still in his uniform, lying face down. Not dead, just unconscious. Someone had been very careful not to leave bodies. That told Darian something. Whoever did this was professional. He kept moving. The second corridor was worse. A diplomatic shuttle, small and sleek, sat cracked open against the dock wall like a broken shell. Its side door had been blown off from the outside. There was glass on the floor. There was blood on the glass. The shuttle bore markings Darian did not recognize at first. Gold and deep blue, elegant shapes that looked more like art than writing. Then he remembered the briefing from 3 months ago. Athon sovereignty, the most powerful empire in the eastern half of the galaxy. Their ships were unmistakable. He stepped inside. She was in the back, pressed into the corner behind a collapsed seat. Her skin was pale blue, almost silver in the dim emergency lighting. Her eyes were large and dark, shaped differently from human eyes, and they were watching him with the focused stillness of someone who was trying very hard not to panic. She was young. She was wearing what might once have been ceremonial clothing, deep blue and gold, now torn and stained dark at her side where something had cut through. She was bleeding, and she had been bleeding for a while. Darian did not know who she was. He did not know that she was the Princess Ventara, first heir to the Athon throne, traveling in secret as part of a diplomatic mission that was never supposed to be publicly announced. He did not know that 3 pirate ships, hired by parties unknown, had tracked her shuttle for 6 days, and finally made their move here, at Valthari 9, where they believed no one would interfere. He did not know that the Galactic Conclave had eyes on this station, that 2 separate intelligence agencies were already scrambling to respond, or that the political situation surrounding this young woman's safety was so complicated it would have taken a full hour just to explain the basics. That was enough. He crossed the cabin in 4 steps, crouched down, and looked at the wound. It was deep, along her left side, below the ribs. Not immediately fatal, but she was losing too much blood too fast. He had a field kit on his belt. He always had a field kit on his belt. This is going to hurt, he said, which was probably useless because she almost certainly did not speak English. She said something in a language he did not understand, short and sharp, and he had no idea if she was agreeing with him or telling him to get away from her. He decided to assume she was agreeing. He opened the kit, found what he needed, and worked fast. The cauterizer was the size of a pen. He had used it before, in worse places than this. He held the wound closed with one hand, and used the tool with the other, and she made a sound that was not quite a scream but close to it. And then she was quiet, and the bleeding slowed. He could hear boots in the corridor now. Not station guards. The footsteps were too controlled, too deliberate. The pirates were coming back to finish the job. Darien picked her up. She was lighter than he expected, but not by much. He slung her across his shoulders, in the carry position he had been taught in his second year of service, stood up, and walked back out the way he came. The corridor was dark. He moved fast and low, keeping to the wall, using the flickering lights as cover when he could. He had memorized the station layout in his first week here, because that was what he did in any new posting. Memorize the exits, know where the escape pods were. The nearest pod bay was 2 corridors over and 1 deck down. He heard a shout behind him, then running. He ran faster. The pod bay door took 4 seconds to open, because the system required a manual override when the station was in partial lockdown. He stood there for those 4 seconds, with the princess over his shoulders, and the sound of pursuit getting louder. And he did not let himself think about it, just counted the seconds and pushed through when the door finally gave. There were 6 pods in the bay. He took the nearest one, put her inside first, then climbed in after, and hit the launch sequence. The pod fired with a hard jolt that rattled his teeth, and then there was the brief, weightless silence of separation, and then the soft hiss of the emergency systems coming online. He looked at her. She was awake. She was watching him with those large, dark eyes, and there was something in her expression that he could not read, some emotion that his human mind had no name for. He said the only thing that came to mind, which was, "Are you okay?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then she said something in that language he did not know, soft and slow, and even though he could not understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. It was a question, and from the way she said it, he had a feeling she was asking him the same thing. He leaned back against the pod wall, closed his eyes, and decided he would worry about everything else later. The pod was already broadcasting its distress signal. Someone would find them. He did not yet understand that someone already had. Darien woke up on a bed that was too soft. This was his first thought. His second thought was that the ceiling above him was the wrong color. It was a pale gold, almost luminous, with a faint pattern in it like flowing water frozen in place. Not the gray metal ceiling of a station bunk. Not the cracked plaster ceiling of a military barracks. Something else entirely. His third thought was that someone had changed his clothes while he was unconscious. He sat up slowly. The room was large by any standard he had known, maybe 8 meters across, with tall curved walls, and soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. There were no visible windows, but the light felt like morning. The bed he was lying in was wide enough for 3 of him, draped in fabric that his hands could not find the right word for. Not silk, not cotton, something that felt more like cool water than cloth. On a low table near the bed there was a cup of something steaming. He stared at it for a moment, decided it was probably not poison, since keeping him alive seemed to be the current theme, and drank it. It tasted like tea made from a plant that had never been on Earth. Not bad, just foreign. He was still sitting there holding the cup when the door opened. The woman who entered was tall. Most Athon were tall, he would learn later, nearly 2 meters on average, with that pale blue skin and those large dark eyes that took in more light than human eyes and processed it differently. She was dressed in formal clothes, deep blue and gold, and she moved with the careful deliberateness of someone performing a ceremony. Behind her were 2 guards, in pale silver armor, standing so still they might have been statues. She stopped 3 meters from him and said something in the Athon language. Then a small device on her wrist chimed, and she said it again, but this time the words came out in English, flat and precise, translated by machine. The Princess Ventara will speak with you now, if you are well enough to stand. Who is the Princess Ventara? There was a pause. The woman looked at him the way people look at someone who has just said something that does not compute. She is the first heir of the Athon sovereignty, the translator said. She is the daughter of the Emperor. She is the woman you carried out of the burning shuttle 2 days ago. Darien was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Right, yes, I can stand. The room where the princess received him was 3 times larger than the room he had slept in. The ceiling was higher. The light was softer. Everything in it looked expensive in a way that went beyond money, the kind of expensive that comes from hundreds of years of accumulated refinement, of artisans building on artisans, of each generation trying to outdo the last in the art of making things beautiful. Ventara was standing when he entered. She was taller than he remembered. In the escape pod she had seemed smaller somehow, or maybe that was just the context, a hurt and frightened person in a small metal box. Here, standing straight in her formal clothes, with her wound hidden beneath the cloth, she was something else. Composed, watchful. The kind of person who had grown up knowing that every room she entered would look at her first. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. The translator on the tall woman's wrist was silent. Then Ventara spoke, and the translator said, You did not know who I was. No, he said. You helped me anyway. You were bleeding, he said, which seemed to him to cover the matter adequately. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she said something longer, and the translator worked through it carefully. In the Athon sovereignty, when one person saves another from death, there is a bond between them. It is called the Velinar. There is no good translation for it in your language. The closest your language comes is life debt. It means the one who was saved owes the one who saved them an equal weight of life. It means they are bound. It means that my standing in the Empire becomes in part your standing. Until the debt is repaid, you are under my protection, and I am bound by honor to treat you as I would treat my own kin. Darien stared at her. That seems like a lot, he said. For the first time since he had entered the room, something changed in her expression. It was not quite a smile. It was more like the edge of one. Yes, the translator said. It is. He did not understand what had happened until 3 days later, when a human diplomat arrived on the Athon ship, looking pale and slightly unhinged. The diplomat's name was Karis. She was from the United Nations Office of Galactic Affairs, which was a department that had existed for 40 years, and had spent most of that time doing very little, because humanity was not supposed to have galactic affairs yet. She found Darien in one of the ship's smaller sitting rooms, staring out at the stars, and she sat down across from him and put a data tablet on the table between them. Do you understand what you've done? She said. I stopped a woman from bleeding to death. You created an alliance, Karis said. You are now, by Athon law, a person of royal standing, which means Earth now has a direct link to the Athon throne, which means every treaty, every trade agreement, every political arrangement that was built on the understanding that humanity was a protected primitive world with no connections to major powers, all of it has to be rethought. I didn't sign anything, Darien said. You didn't have to. You carried her out of that shuttle. That was enough. Karis pushed the tablet toward him. The Galactic Conclave has called an emergency session. There are 14 different governments that have filed formal inquiries about the incident in the last 48 hours. 3 of them are asking whether the rescue was staged. Was it? Darien said. No, Karis said, which in some ways makes it worse. A staged incident could be explained. A genuine one can't. People don't know what to do with the genuine ones. Darien picked up the tablet and looked at it. He could not read most of what was on it, because it was full of political language and galactic legal terminology. But he could see his own name appearing over and over, and next to it, every time, the word human. He put the tablet back down. What happens now? The princess is returning to the Aethon capital. She has requested that you accompany her, which is not really a request, and we cannot say no, because if we say no, we are refusing a gesture of goodwill from the most powerful empire in the Eastern Galaxy, which would be a diplomatic incident. I just want to go home, Darien said. Karis looked at him with tired eyes. Sergeant, she said, I don't think you understand. You don't have a home to go back to. Not the same one. Everything changed 2 days ago. She stood up and straightened her jacket. Get some rest. We leave for the Aethon capital in the morning. She left. Darien sat alone with the stars moving slowly past the window, and thought about a burning corridor, and a woman pressed into a corner, and the decision that had not even felt like a decision at the time. Somewhere in the galaxy, 14 governments were rethinking their plans. Somewhere in the Galactic Conclave, someone was already asking the question that would change everything. The question was simple. What exactly were humans capable of, and why had no one bothered to find out? The files were leaked on a Tuesday. No one ever found out who did it, though there were theories. What mattered was the effect. The files were called the Sol Observation Logs, 214 years of drone surveillance records compiled by the Galactic Conclave's Primitive Species Monitoring Division, a department that technically did not exist publicly, but in practice had been operating since before any human alive had been born. The files covered everything: wars, famines, the development of nuclear weapons, the slow and painful construction of international cooperation, the private communications of world leaders, the internal debates of military organizations. All of it recorded, logged, analyzed, and filed away under the category of developmental primitive, do not contact. The files were made public on 47 galactic news networks simultaneously. The galaxy read them. The reaction was not what anyone had predicted. Some species were horrified by the violence in the records. Humanity's history was, by galactic standards, extraordinarily bloody. The number of wars in the first 2,000 years of recorded human history was roughly equivalent to the total number of wars fought by all other Conclave member species combined over the same period. The analysts who had compiled the files had flagged this repeatedly, using phrases like deeply aberrant conflict rate, and appears to normalize intraspecies violence in a way not observed elsewhere. But other species read something different in the same records. They noticed something the analysts had mentioned only in passing, almost as a footnote, as if it were not important. Humans did not fight only for resources, they fought for ideas. The analysts had classified this as irrational behavior, a sign of emotional instability that the species had not yet evolved past. But there were readers in the galaxy who looked at the same data and thought something else. They looked at the wars fought over concepts like freedom and dignity and the right to exist, and they read the personal logs of soldiers and civilians and doctors and teachers who had walked into terrible situations knowing they might not come back, and something in those records made them quiet in a way that was different from horror. It made them uncertain. The conclave session was held in closed chambers, but the summary was published. 14 hours of debate had produced one resolution: Containment Order 7. The order would place a military blockade around Earth's solar system, strip the Vel-Anar bond of its legal standing under galactic law, on the grounds that it had been formed outside the normal protocols, and return humanity to protected primitive status pending a full review of their classification. Princess Ventara heard about the vote while sitting in a briefing room on the Aethon diplomatic ship with Darien and 2 of her advisors. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said in English, which she had been learning at a speed that still unsettled Darien slightly, "They are afraid." "Of what?" Darien said. "Of what you might become," she said. "Of what you might already be." She invoked the Vel-Anar bond publicly the next morning, in a broadcast that went to every conclave member world. Her speech was short. She said that the Aethon sovereignty did not recognize Containment Order 7. She said that the bond between herself and the human who had saved her life was not a legal arrangement to be nullified by committee vote, but a matter of honor. and that the Aethon did not abandon their honor because it was inconvenient. She said that any ship that approached Earth's solar system in a hostile capacity would be doing so in defiance of the Aethon sovereignty's position. She said it all very calmly, in that composed voice she had, the one that did not rise or fall much, but somehow carried everything it needed to carry. The conclave fractured. 3 species backed the Aethon position immediately. 4 others filed neutrality declarations. The Kethal Dominion, which had pushed hardest for Containment Order 7, and which had the most to lose from a humanity with galactic standing, said nothing publicly. Privately, they sent 3 warships to Earth's solar system. Not to attack, to demonstrate. The ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in Earth orbit on a Thursday afternoon, local time. They did not hail Earth's governments. They did not transmit any message. They simply appeared. 3 enormous vessels, holding position roughly 12,000 kilometers above the planet's surface, visible to the naked eye from the night side as 3 slow-moving points of light. The news spread across Earth in hours. Every government was watching. Every military was on alert. The UN Office of Galactic Affairs was trying to reach the conclave on 11 different frequencies simultaneously. There were protests in the streets of 6 major cities. There were emergency sessions of Parliament and Congress and Council in a dozen countries. There were people on the rooftops of buildings with telescopes watching the 3 lights move. Darian watched it from the Aethon ship's communication bay, a live feed from Earth's broadcast networks. He watched the news anchors trying to explain what was happening, with the careful, measured voices of people who were frightened but had a job to do. He watched the streets. He watched the crowds. He did not think they looked as frightened as the news anchors. Ventara came and stood beside him at some point. She watched too, for a while. Then she said, "What will they do?" "I don't know," Darian said. "Something." The something happened at 2,200 hours Greenwich time. A transmission went out from the International Science Cooperation Center in Geneva, broadcast on every frequency, including the military frequencies used by the Kethal ships. The transmission was from a single person, a physicist named Dr. Amara Ose, 61 years old, originally from Accra, who had spent her career studying the propulsion signatures of alien spacecraft from a very safe distance. Her voice was steady. Her message was short. She said, "To the vessels currently in Earth's orbital space, you are over our home. You are not invited. We do not know what you intend. But we want you to understand something clearly. You have 48 hours to leave our solar system. After that time, if you are still here, we will consider your presence an act of war and respond accordingly. This message comes from all of us. We hope you make the right choice." The transmission ended. There was a silence in the communication bay on the Aethon ship that lasted for several seconds. Then one of the Aethon advisors said something in his own language that the translator rendered as, "They have no ships capable of fighting those vessels." "No," Darian agreed. "They know this." "Yes," Darian said. "Then why?" "Because they mean it," Darian said. He was still watching the screen. He could see the 3 lights moving in their slow orbit. That's the part you need to understand. She wasn't bluffing. None of them are. They mean every word. The Aethon advisor looked at the screen for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "That is either the bravest thing I have ever heard, or the most foolish." Darian thought about 31 hours without sleep, and a burning corridor, and a decision that was not really a decision. "With us," he said, "those 2 things are usually the same." The Kethal did not leave. When the 48 hours were up, the 3 ships were still there, holding their positions in Earth orbit, as if the message from Geneva had been nothing more than background noise. They still sent no communication. They made no demands. They just stayed, patient and heavy and unmoved, like stones dropped into a pond that refused to sink. On Earth, 2 days passed in that state. 2 days of governments arguing, of military commanders calculating odds, that did not add up in any reassuring direction. Of ordinary people going to work and coming home, and watching the news, and feeling the particular helpless anger of knowing that something was happening to their world, and there was nothing immediate they could do about it. On the third day, the 3 ships became 30. The new arrivals came without warning, jumping into the solar system at the edge of detection range, and moving in toward Earth in a slow, deliberate formation that was not quite a battle arrangement, but was close enough to make every military analyst on the planet go pale. 30 Kethal warships. Each one was, by every available estimate, more powerful than anything Earth currently had in orbit. Earth had 11 armed ships. They had been built over the previous decade, assembled quietly in orbit, from whatever technology had been legally obtained through conclave trade routes, and they were not impressive by galactic standards. They were short-range, underpowered, and lightly armored. The Kethal commanders looking at their sensor readouts would have been forgiven for not worrying about them at all. Earth's ships moved to intercept anyway. The first battle lasted 4 hours. Earth lost 3 ships. The Kethal lost 1. By any standard mathematical measure, this was not a loss that should have encouraged further resistance. The numbers were clear. The recommendation in every tactical model the Kethal commanders had run said the same thing. Offer terms, humanity accepts, the situation resolves. Earth offered no terms. Earth launched everything it had left. Darien watched some of it from the Aethon ship, which had moved to a position at the edge of the system. Ventara watched beside him. There was not a lot to say. You could not watch your own species fight and say anything that felt equal to it. What the Kethal commanders did not understand, what the conclave analysts had flagged but not truly comprehended from their observation reports, was this. Humans had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. Not reluctantly, not as an unfortunate last resort. They had built entire cultures around it. They had art about it, music about it, religions about it. They had developed ways of thinking in conflict that were as deep and automatic as breathing. When a tactic failed, they did not go back to the manual. They invented something new while the battle was still happening. The second engagement was different from the first. Earth's remaining ships did not fight the way the Kethal expected them to fight. They scattered. They attacked from directions that should have been tactically useless. 3 of them flew directly into the path of incoming fire, not to die, but to force the Kethal to break formation in order to avoid what the enemy ships were doing. It was not logical. It was not in any tactical model the Kethal possessed. It was the kind of move you make when you are so angry that the idea of dying in the process is genuinely not a deterrent. Earth lost 2 more ships. The Kethal lost 4. The Kethal called for reinforcements. Earth put out a call for volunteers. The volunteers came faster than the reinforcements. They came from research stations and mining platforms and the half-finished habitats that humans had been quietly building out in the asteroid belt for the past 30 years. They came in ships that were technically not warships, cargo haulers, and survey vessels, and 1 large construction platform that had been fitted with what appeared to be a series of very large electromagnetic accelerators. They came because the planet below them was their planet, and the people on it were their people, and the concept of standing aside while that was threatened was not something the human brain processed easily. Darien was not watching from the Aethon ship by the 3rd day. It was not strictly legal, and it required the assistance of a pilot who owed him a favor from an entirely different incident 3 years ago. But it worked. He was on Earth by the 2nd week of the conflict, back in uniform, back doing the thing he had been trained to do. He did not tell Ventara he was going. He left her a written message. It said, "I have to go back. I'm sorry. I'll explain when I see you again." He was not entirely sure he would see her again, but the message felt necessary. She sent back 3 words in English, the language she had been practicing. The message said, "I know. Go." The war ran for 6 weeks. It was not a clean 6 weeks. There were days when the numbers were very bad, when Earth lost more than it gained, when the mathematics of the situation were undeniable and brutal and clear. There were battles where humanity did not win. There were engagements where they lost enough that by any civilized galactic standard, the correct next step was surrender. They did not surrender. They adapted. Every tactic the Kethal used successfully once was never fully successful again. The humans watched, learned, modified, and came back differently each time. They were also, and this was the part that truly bewildered the Kethal commanders, getting angrier as the weeks went on, rather than more tired. There was a quality to human warfare that no sensor could measure, and no model had predicted. The more they lost, the harder they pushed. Not from desperation, from something that looked from the outside, almost like a refusal to accept the physical reality of the situation. By week 4, the Kethal were taking losses they had not projected. By week 5, 3 of their allied species had quietly withdrawn their ships, citing non-involvement clauses in old treaties. By week 6, a Kethal admiral sat down with his senior commanders and went through the numbers for the first time in private, with no one else present, and said something that was never officially recorded, but was later remembered by everyone in the room. He said, "We are going to run out of ships before they run out of reasons to fight." On the 43rd day of the conflict, the Kethal sent a message. They were requesting terms. Darien heard about it while sitting in a temporary command post outside Geneva, eating something cold out of a container. Someone came in and told him, and he nodded and finished eating. He was very tired. He had been very tired for 6 weeks. Around him, other soldiers were reacting in different ways, some of them quietly, some of them not quietly at all. Someone started crying. Someone else started laughing. These were not contradictory responses. He thought about the 3 lights in the sky over Earth, all those weeks ago, and the message from Geneva, and the voice of Dr. Amara Osei, steady and calm, saying, "We mean it." They had meant it. That, he thought, was the thing the Kethal had never understood, the thing the whole galaxy had never understood. When humans said something, they usually meant it. The negotiating room was on a neutral station, 3 weeks after the last Kethal ship left Earth's solar system. It was a large room, with a long, curved table in the center, and around that table sat representatives from 11 different species. Some of them in chairs built for their bodies, some of them standing because their physiology preferred it. One of them suspended in a tank of fluid that was carefully transported from their homeworld for occasions like this. Darien had been told the name of every representative before entering the room. He had forgotten most of them immediately, not from rudeness, but from sheer volume. There were too many people, too many worlds, too many centuries of complicated history attached to each face across the table. He was wearing his dress uniform, which had been cleaned and pressed, and still did not fit properly in the shoulders. Ventara stood beside him. She had arrived 2 days before the negotiations began, traveling with a full Aethon diplomatic delegation, and she had come to find him on the first evening in the small plain room that had been assigned to him, and they had sat together for a while without saying much. There was a lot between them that was difficult to put into words, partly because some of it was genuinely inexpressible, and partly because the words existed in 2 different languages and the translations were imperfect. At some point she had said, "You came back." "Yes," he said. "I was not certain you would." "I wasn't either," he said honestly. She had looked at him for a moment in that careful way she had. Then she had said, "I am glad you are alive, Sergeant Darien Holt," and that was all. But from her, it was a great deal. The negotiations took 4 days. Earth received everything it had asked for. Full membership in the Galactic Conclave, technology exchange rights equal to any member species, the containment order stripped from the records, as if it had never existed. The Kethal Dominion paid reparations, not large ones by galactic standards, but symbolically significant, which was in some ways more important. The Vel Anar Bond was formally recognized in galactic law, which had a number of political implications that Karis, who was present, and looked like she had not slept in 2 months, seemed simultaneously delighted and alarmed by. Darien signed documents for 3 hours on the second day. He was not sure he understood everything he signed, but the lawyers and diplomats standing behind him had read everything multiple times, and none of them had told him to stop. So, he kept going. On the fourth day, when the last document was completed, the room did a thing that surprised him. It went quiet. Not the strained quiet of a tense negotiation, but a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after something large has finished, when everyone in the room is aware that a moment has passed that will be discussed for a long time afterward. He was standing there in that quiet when the oldest delegate in the room came to speak to him. Her name was Velshara. She was from a species called the Shanethi, who had been members of the Galactic Conclave for just over 3,000 years. She was small and gray-skinned, and moved slowly, not from weakness, but from a kind of deliberateness that comes from living long enough to know that hurrying rarely improves things. She had been watching Darien throughout the 4 days of negotiations, with an attention that he had noticed, but not been able to interpret. She stopped in front of him. Her translator device was older than the others, the size of a small box clipped to her collar. "May I ask you something?" the box said. "Sure," Darien said. "Your species." She looked at him steadily. Her eyes were yellow, and did not blink in the way human eyes do. "You have been at war with yourselves for almost your entire recorded history. You have come very close, on multiple occasions, to destroying your own planet. By our records, there were at least 4 moments in your last 200 years where the outcome could have gone the other way entirely." She paused. "How did you survive it? How did you get here?" Around them, the room was beginning to fill with quiet conversation, representatives talking to their aides, documents being gathered, the ordinary activity that follows the end of something important. He thought about the question seriously. It deserved a serious answer. He thought about the wars in the history books he had read growing up, and the ones that came after, and the ones that were still half remembered by his grandparents' generation. He thought about the volunteer ships that had come from the asteroid belt, and Dr. Osei's voice on the broadcast, and the soldiers around him in the Geneva command post when the ceasefire message arrived, crying and laughing at the same time. He thought about a burning corridor and a woman bleeding in the dark, and the moment where he had not thought about it, just moved. "We didn't," he said. "Always. We just kept going anyway." Velshara looked at him. The yellow eyes did not look away. "That is not a satisfying answer," the translator said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't. But it is honest." "Yes," he said. "That's what we've got." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We have maintained the peace of this galaxy, the Shanethi and the others who have been here longest, for 3,000 years. We built the conclave. We built the systems and the agreements and the order that allowed civilization to spread and grow and endure. We are very proud of this." She paused. "We have also, for 3,000 years, kept species like yours contained, managed, safely away from the things that might disturb the peace we had built." Darien waited. "You have made us understand," she said, "that our peace was not as solid as we believed, that it existed in part because no one had ever seriously tested it. You have shown us something we did not want to see." Another pause. "I am not sure whether to be angry with you or grateful." "You could try both," Darien said. For the first time in the conversation, something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something older than a smile. "Yes," the translator said. "I suppose we could." She left. Darien stood alone for a moment in the gradually emptying room. Ventara found him there, as she had a way of doing. She stood beside him and looked at the long curved table and the empty chairs. "What did she say to you?" she asked. Her English was much better now. The accent was her own, something that had no comparison in any human language, but the words came easily. "She asked how we survived," Darien said. "What did you tell her?" "The truth." Ventara was quiet for a moment. "Was it a good answer?" "No," he said. "But it was the right one." Outside the station's observation windows, the stars were the same stars they had always been, cold and distant and indifferent to the small events of small creatures in the dark between them. The galaxy was the same galaxy it had been a year ago, before a burning shuttle and a bleeding stranger and a decision that was not really a decision. And yet, somewhere in 11 governments, diplomats were rewriting the definition of what a civilized species was. Somewhere in the conclave records, a file that had said developmental primitive, do not contact, had been changed to something that no classification system had ever needed a category for before. Somewhere on Earth, ordinary people were going to work and coming home and watching the news and feeling something that was different from what they had felt before. Something that did not have a clean name yet, but was connected to the knowledge that they had been watched from afar for 200 years, and measured, and judged not ready, and that they had then, in the space of 6 weeks, made the entire galaxy revise that judgment. And in a small office in Geneva, Amara Osei was sitting at her desk looking at a message from the Conclave's Science Division, inviting her to come and speak at their next symposium, and she was thinking that she might go. Darian Holt went home. He slept for 14 hours straight, which was the longest he had slept in years. He made coffee. He sat in a chair by a window and looked at his city, ordinary and loud and full of people who did not know his name and did not need to, and he thought that it was very good to see it again. The galaxy had paid a price for what had happened. So had Earth. So had he. That was the nature of things. There was no moment like that one, no turning point that large, that did not cost something. But the stars were still there when he looked up, and so, against considerable odds, was he.